Snow came early to the haunted forest, fine as ground bone, whispering between the black-barked pines. It gathered white in Ghost's fur, turned the direwolf into a moving drift gliding at Jon's knee. They walked the old game trails where the trunks grew close and the blue dark thickened between them, listening to the wind and to the distant hollow boom of something far off on the ice. Every sound in winter had a shape to it. Every shape cast a memory. The forest still held his life within it, as if the cold itself had learned his gait and would keep it in the snow long after he had passed. The free folk kept their fires low behind him, smoke seeping like fine thread through the branches. Tormund had gone back to the river camp to scold the young men into building windbreaks with pine boughs instead of boasting they could drink the night warm. He had left Jon a skin of harsh liquor and 2 slaps on the shoulder, one of friendship and one of farewell that said more than words about the distance that time made. They had built a life of clear breath, of meat spit over flint sparks, of listening. Jon had learned again how to wake with the dawn and name the taste of fresh water. He had learned what a man could keep and what he could not. For days the dreams had thickened into purpose, the way a river under ice makes itself heard. He would wake with a scent in his nose of stone after rain without rain around him, and a taste like metal beneath the tongue, and the memory of stairways cut from volcanic glass, and a breath that was not a breath scouring his skin. He said nothing. Ghost watched him with one red eye, one gold. The dire wolf knew. Animals always knew when a boundary had thinned. It began the night the sky tore in a quiet way and streaked itself with green light. The old men called it a foxfire, a spirit path, the shifting robe of a woman who had married the north wind. Jon lay awake feeling the color hum like a wire strung above him. The smell of stone drew closer, made a room around his body. He saw it again, the hall of hexagonal black, where every step rang like a cup struck with a knife. He stood there and felt heat through the soles of his boots, though nothing burned. A whisper came in that was not a voice and not his own thought, and it spoke in a language that his blood knew as if it were water. It was as old as iron being pulled from earth. Said, "Come." In the morning he told no one, because there was no need to say he would go. When you have been summoned in a way that does not use the many names men use for summoning, you rise. He left Ghost among the sleeping bodies and the thin antlered trees. He cut south with the dawn at his back and the ice-caked river switching quietly between stones, his boots whispering in hoarfrost, his breath going up like a spirit into the sweet blue morning. By the time he reached the coast, snow had given over to rain that tasted of salt. He stood where the sea made black shards of sound on the pebbled strand and watched the gulls turn the air into a net of pale wings. The dreams came like tide. He had no coin, no cargo, only his old name and the one that had been laid on him like a secret too heavy for his years. But men who lived by water had a way of weighing a face against their own luck. "You have the sea's look on you," the first captain said, squinting through tar reek and spindrift. "There's always a place for a man who haunts his own wake." He made it as far as Eastwatch with them, lashed to a deck that groaned like a living thing. After that there were other decks, other tongues blowing hard across their own thoughts. He kept his hood up in the southern cities and learned to sleep with the sound of many feet and bells. A boy who swept an inn yard in White Harbor asked him if he was a Sellsword. Jon told him no. When the boy asked where he was going, Jon said, "Where the earth breathes," and afterwards could not say why. Davos found him in the fog that draped itself across Dragonstone like a robe too large for the island. The Onion Knight limped out of the damp like an old dream returning, his eyes bright in his furrowed face. He took Jon's arm with both hands and gripped it the way sailors grip a line in a squall, as if the body of the man were a rope that promised harbor. "Somewhere between luck and the mother's grace I hoped I'd trip over you," he said, his mouth trying on a grin and finding it fit. "The seas have been talking. The glass candles burn again in places where they were cold, and some men say there is music in the hot cracks under the world. We were always fools not to listen to what scalded us." "Why are you here?" Jon asked, though he knew. "The same reason as you," Davos said, and looked up through the fog at the mountain that was not a mountain, the old volcano whose bones had made palaces for dragon kings. "She called. There were women on the island whose grandmothers had midwifed the last of the Valyrians and men whose fathers had cut the basalt steps in the days when dragons still marked the sky with long thunder. They moved around Jon with shy eyes, as if he were a beast come out of a tale to drink from their well. Melisandre was not there. The Red Woman had gone into her own fire, or into the snow past the watchful trees, and left only the echo of her talk of stone hearts and light and the way blood could be a key. Kaith's name came up in whispers, a woman in a lacquered mask who had once stood in the shadow of the east and now was seen sometimes in flickers on the face of the water, as if something watched through her and did not blink. When the island's wind found Jon's hair at night, he felt as if fingers had combed it and were counting. "You can go back yet," Davos said during the second evening, when they sat in a room whose walls had been carved into the shape of scales that shone when the fire moved. "I don't say should, I say can. It's a word a man uses when he loves another man. The world will make must and mustn't for you without help." Jon traced a thumb along the edge of the obsidian cup in front of him, feeling little bites where the shaping had left teeth. "Back where?" Davos nodded, as if the question were its own most truthful answer, and poured more wine. They climbed at dawn, when the fog was lifting its skirts slowly off the lower slopes. The path set Jon's calves on fire and coaxed his breath into that steady, dogged rhythm of endurance that a man learned when there was nobody to impress and nothing to prove except that he could meet the day. The side of the Dragonmont was treacherous with old lava flows that froze mid-motion. A black sea suddenly held. They walked over an architecture of eruptions. The earth smelled like a forge. The entrance was older than itself. Davos had a lamp that burned with a clear, brass-colored light and did not smoke. He did not say where he had got it. Its glow reached a little ahead and found the start of the steps that had been taking shape in Jon's nerves for weeks. They had been cut by men for whom stone yielded like bread. There were sigils on the walls that the eye did not like to keep, images that moved in their stillness. He felt, not for the first time, that something inside him were the true lamp, and all this a mirror for it. They went down so long that down became its own kind of weather. Heat lapped at his face, barely, like the memory of summer that a cold river keeps in a deep bend. The hall opened as if a throat had been swallowed and found to be a great room. The ceiling was lost somewhere up where the light would not go. The air held a taste of complicated metal, like a breath drawn across coins minted by no king alive. Jon stood in the center of a floor that was a single slab of obsidian. It seemed to him that this was the place his footsteps had wanted all his life and rejected in their ignorance. He could not keep breathing without tasting his own heart. He had not asked Davos to come further. The Onion Knight waited in the arch with the lamp and did not shout a blessing or a warning. He held himself like a man on a quay watching a ship that he could not board. Jon knelt. He opened his palm with the practiced, tidy movement of a man who had bled himself before to make a bargain with the world. Blood came red-black in the lamp's low light. He did not know the words in any of the tongues he had learned that were the right words for this. He had only the shape of his name and the shape that lay hidden beneath it, a shape like a blade under a winter cloak. He let the blood fall. It struck the glass with a sound like a plucked wire. The floor took it. The sound went outwards. He felt it find the walls and climb them in quiet palings, touch the sigils and wake them into the slow, satisfied ripple of things opening. The slab grew warm beneath his knees. The air moved, not a wind but a change in thought. Jon closed his eyes and felt it, an old hunger rolling over in its long sleep and putting its face to the scent of daylight on the surface of the world. He had known fear. He had learned by living that fear lifted you into attention that could be beautiful. This was not fear. This was recognition. The heat came up until the skin on his hands thought of blisters and then backed away from that thought. The sound deepened as if a second string had been plucked at the far side of the earth. When he opened his eyes, the floor beneath him had dreamed a pattern, wide, slowly turning, like a great iris taking shape. It was not an eye, yet it said all that eyes say. "Come," the not voice said again, and now he knew it spoke from below. The first exhale dusted him with cinders that were not from fire. They were like the ash that comes when an old oath is burned. The The second carried a smell that bent him. A complex salt, hot copper, buried forests turned stone, and then turned back, storms from far in the belly of the world. He rose. The crack came with a reluctant sweetness, glass separating where it had been pressed together for an age. A seam went across the slab before him, not hurried, not slow, and the floor parted into lips that were not flesh, into an opening that was not a mouth. Heat rose like a thought returning, and in its rise he saw first the suggestion of a ridge, then of hooked bone, then of scales that made each little fire in the lamp run and multiply. The head came up the way a mountain might stand. He had seen Valyrian's skull mounted in King's Landing, watched light pool in the great eye sockets as if memory were a liquid that could be poured. This was larger than memory. The teeth came up one by one like towers the wind hated. The skin between the scales was a dark new-forged iron, and the scales themselves were black with a drowned sheen that gathered light and made it kneel. Steam wreathed the muzzle as it rose, and the eyes opened like things that had every right to do so. Vertical pupils, molten bronze irises shot with filaments of mercury. The gaze fell on him with the simplicity of gravity finding a stone. The hall lay under the dragon's breath. No word men had used would fit it. It smelled like the end of the world and like the beginning. Jon held the gaze, not bravely, not with stubbornness, but with the acceptance of a fact that would remain a fact with or without his assent. His blood sang in the old cadences that had come down across the centuries with all the names and crowns, the little deaths and meals and bedding and begetting that made up dynasties. He raised his hand. The movement was both an offering and a recognition of the offering that had been made in him before he was born, when the world had been dividing men and work into their separate kingdoms. The dragon's tongue slid out slow as a rolling wave and tasted his palm. It was hot and rough as pumice. The wound closed under it with a pull like a stitch. The eyes narrowed. An inner lid moved across them with dusty swee. Etnis and back again. The dragon breathed out. Jon's hair lifted. His skin tightened. He felt all the edges of himself taken measure of and filed. Zareth, he said, though he had not chosen the name. It had been waiting behind the thought of naming the way a harbor waits behind fog. The dragon's head tipped a fraction, as if the name had been placed where it ought. The old hall held the new quiet of an accord reached. Davos did not cry aloud, but the sound he made in his throat was a prayer that had lost its words. He did not come forward. He bowed his head, and the lamp's light laid a thin blade across his cheekbone. When the dragon climbed fully from the blackness, the floor healed behind it without a seam. The body made the air into a geography of heat and movement. The wings unfolded like the memory of continents. Their inner surfaces were the color of crow's wings seen in sun, rimmed in a pale scorch mark that was almost silver. The hall bent with presence. Jon placed his palm on the bone ridge above the dragon's eye, where the heat was strongest, and felt the sound in his chest change. The light grew brighter without growing whiter. The lamp took on a greater meaning in the corner, like a man made holy by proximity. When they moved up the stair together, it was with the rolling certainty of tide, always upwards, always towards the mouth of the world. The morning had turned to a sharp pearl when they came out upon the mountainside. The sea lay like beaten lead. Clouds fined out into tatters, the wind picked up and shook. Men down by the quays fell to their knees in the old reflexes that had never truly left the island, and those who had never learned those kneelings made their own version of them. Zareth turned his head to take in not the men but the angle of the light, and the line of the horizon, and the breathing bowl of the sky. Jon climbed because that was what came next. The saddles of old were bones and leather. He had none of those. His legs took the ridge where the neck rose and fell beneath him like something thought by earth. His hands found the scale seams. He said the name again, and the dragon became a verb. The first downbeat had the sound of a sail tearing in a gale. The second took them from the slope. The wind clove around them. Jon felt the bones of the neck under him flex and settle, as if he were riding the architecture of a cathedral that had learned to move. The island fell away with the ease of things dropped from an empty hand. The sea lifted to meet them without rising. There are moments when a life realizes the scale of itself. The cold bit him and made a pure place in him where flame could be poured. He laughed once into the wind and did not hear it. The weight of the dragon was a story that kept telling itself. The sea bent under them into curves that had not existed before they passed. They flew low enough that the spindrift struck his boots and high enough to see the colors that men call one thing resolve into many. They turned west, then south, then east, following a compass older than iron. The smoking sea lay like a map of the inside of lungs, breathing slantwise, coughing up long threads of steam. The ruins of Valyria were not ruins in the way that human minds like them to be. There was nothing composed there, nothing of the clean vertical language of fallen walls. There were shapes like bones and like shells, and the sea hissed where it touched what it hated. The stone men watched with their blank patience from their broken aisles. In one place the water ran like oil in colors that should not name themselves. Jon felt Zareth make a sound through his nostrils that translated in him as disdain. They circled above the place at the exact center of the troubled sea, where the breath of the earth came up most steadily. It was as if a heart beat there and had always beaten. The dragon unreeled a cry that split clouds and found the hot places under the skin of the world. The sea answered, lifting its shoulders. Steam veiled them in coarse sudden ropes. When it thinned, they were standing on the lip of a caldera the size of a small country, light breaking off the obsidian shelves as if off a sudden wet eye. There were structures there that men had not built with hands, though men had once ruled them. Arches that could not hold themselves up held themselves up. Stairs that could never have been cut with a blade had been cut. Jon felt open to the bone. To ride a dragon above Valyria was to become a nerve in the world's own body. It was not triumph. It was not pride. It was belonging in the oldest sense, which is also the heaviest. Later there would be words. Now there was only breath. Zareth spiraled down toward a shelf the color of old smoke. Jon dismounted without thinking and felt heat under his boots like a sickness that had chosen to be a friend. He walked. The facades were blank and then not blank, changing only when one looked away. He came to a door that was not a door and knew it would be opened by what he was, or not at all. He put his hand to the stone. Behind his ribs something lifted its head. A figure stood in the doorway when he looked up from the feel of the stone. The shape was long and spare and wrapped in thin pale cloth that moved without wind. The face was hidden behind a mask worked in lacquer the color of old tea. The eyes were empty as the sea beyond. "You took your time," Kaith said in a voice that he knew though he had heard it only in the voice of others. "Mendi. Names go down into their bones like nails. The hot places wait. The world circles its own meaning until it touches it again." "I did not know," Jon said, and then knew the lie in it. He had always known. Knowing is not the same as being ready to know. "The dragons dreamed you," she said, and tilted her head. "The fire that lives under the skin of your name dreamed you. The snow dreamed you and the cold iron did. On the day you first drew breath, the oldest place in the world turned over and resumed sleeping, so your feet might find this stair when there was no time left for not finding it. I didn't come to take what was hers," he said, and the words were out before he weighed them. "She took what was her own," Kaith said, and behind the mask Jon could hear not laughter but the movement a laugh would make if it were too serious. "The world is not a ledger. Hymns do not balance, but there are fruits that ripen out of season. Your hand on the beast's brow is such a fruit. Do not ask what winter owes summer. Ask only if you can keep a field alive when the crows fall out of the air." "Why me?" The question was as old as knives. "Because your blood remembers and your heart refuses," she said. "Because half of you is a spear of ice that will not bend and the other half is flame that knows its own shame. Because men will follow you when they do not want to. Because you were killed and kept walking. Because this world is one of weather and of breath. And there is a wind at last that does not merely wander." "Zareth?" Jon said, turning to look where the dragon lay, vast and dark as a country's shadow. The name sounded right in this place. The dragon lifted his head a little as if to say the same. Somewhere beneath his feet, long vents sighed like sleeping lungs. Kaith's mask turned slightly as if listening to something that ran beneath their talk like a current. The knives in the west are busy again. A boy with a hammer thinks himself a king because the door to his father's castle does not open for him. Ships with yellow sails wait in harbors. An old woman who has never been a girl counts coins into towers and will not sleep for fear of wind. Your sisters dream in different rooms. The one who wears winter on her brow holds a kind of peace that is a blade handled both ways. The other has gone to write her own map in seas where there are no names. The king whose eyes look inward breathes with a tree and sees you only when it suits the tree. Peace is brittle. It always is. John felt the pull of the words like the first small tug of a tide about to turn. He remembered the feel of Sansa's hug, which had always been a little formal even when she had less reason for it. He remembered Arya's mouth turning up to show every crooked tooth in her brave skull when she laughed. He remembered Bran's eyes that looked through you the way a man looks through a window to the weather. He remembered the room in the Red Keep where a skull had looked forever on a chair. "I won't be used to melt what was hard won," he said. Kaith's hands were very still. "Then do not melt. Temper. It is the work of a smith to take what is too brittle to be a sword, and what is too soft to be a sword, and make a sword. You were never a sword. You are the arm that swings it. Wield peace like steel, but you will need a symbol. Men require the stories we put on banners so they can put down the stones in their hands." "The dragon," John said, and the word did what it always did to him. It opened a door in his chest in equal parts wonder and dread. "He will be taken for a claim I don't want. If you do not speak, others will speak for you," Kaith said. "If you speak, others will speak against you. This is the liturgy of rulers. I am not a priest. I am only a door. Beyond me is a room in which fire can be worked so that it remembers its name. But the door opens only once. What lies beyond?" He had once learned to stop asking such questions of such people. He asked anyway. "Understanding," she said, which could have been a cruelty if it had been spoken by a different mouth. "A man cannot ride a storm. A man can let a storm ride him. There are old means for teaching the world and the rider a way to live together. Your blood is a key, but a key is not the thing it opens. You will burn and you will not be consumed." He followed her through into a chamber that curved like the inside of a bell. In its center stood a pedestal of glass that held a bowl as clear as the air above the sea on a day without wind. The bowl held nothing and everything. His reflection was in it and was not. Around the rim sang old letters. He could not name them, but his skin could. "Only what is freely given may teach what cannot be taught," Kaith said. "Give what cannot be taken." John cut his palm a second time, more deeply. Blood came strong, the color of iron and wine. It fell into the bowl and did not break the surface. It went down as if the bowl held a deep sky. Kaith spoke in a rhythm that his blood answered. The room turned its face towards him. Heat found him without hurting. For a moment he was in every place in the world where fire hid in stone. When he came back to himself, the bowl was clear and the cut had closed without a seam. He was kneeling without remembering kneeling. Zareth was outside in the steam, making a sound that made distant birds fall silent. Kaith's mask regarded him with the same unregarding patience as before, but something in the way the cloth lay against her wrists had altered, as if a wind had changed. "You are ready to speak fire," she said. "Do not speak often. Do not speak to men. Speak to the old places. Not all of them will answer, but enough will that the world will remember how to listen." When they rose into the afternoon, the light had shifted to a high chalk. John felt the dragon beneath him as a sentence that had found its verb. He did not smile. He did not weep. His face was a calm place to stand. They flew north and a little west, and then, on a thought that belonged to both of them, they flew higher. The sea below became a broken mirror, the isles like black teeth in a mouth too large to name. Word traveled the way it always had. From mouth to mouth, across decks, down ropes, through markets where fish and rumor both lay on the boards with their bellies open. A great black dragon had been seen whose wings had stolen light from the noon. An exile rode him, or a ghost, or a boy with a wolf's eyes who had died once and then not. Names were attached like lice. The name that held came last, as it always does, after the others are combed out. The name was John. The other name whispered behind it was longer and older and made weaker men bite their tongues. When they set down again on Dragonstone, the island was already changed. Fear is a mason, hope is another. New paths had been beaten in the scree where feet had not gone for years. Someone had begun to sweep the old mosaic in the forecourt of the great hall, and the coils of a dragon were visible again beneath the gray. Fires burned bright, food smelled of garlic and fish. Women who had gone unsmiling for years smiled without meaning to. Children came as close as their mothers would let them and stared in silence at the forelimbs thicker than the trees they had climbed since they were old enough to climb. Davos watched with a sailor's eye that always counted costs. He came up to John and blew out a breath that held no wine. "I'll not pretend I ever liked the beasts," he said mildly. "But I'll say I like you on one better than I like some men on a chair." "I'm not going to take a chair," John said. "I never thought you would," Davos said. "That's half the reason men will ask you to." A raven left the tower before midnight with a letter that had only 3 lines, none of them a command. The bird bore the tiny, careful seal of the king in the red keep, whose sigil was nothing like a stag or a lion. It went west. Another left with the gray wolf of the north pressed into red wax. That one flew north, then west and then north again, hesitated above storms, found a calm draw of air and took it as the sky had been made for it. A third went east under a strip of cloud that looked like a cut in cloth. Each of them found what it went for, because the world sometimes conspires to let things arrive. It was Sansa who replied first, though she did not write at once. It was her habit to put the kettle on before any letter and take the measure of the steam as if it had politics in it. She answered in a hand that had learned to command without shouting. She wrote that the North would not bend and that there were words she would not have said in the soft Summer King's Landing had invented. That she trusted him and would not suffer a dragon to darken the fields where her people's children ran unless he made it so gentle that it made them laugh. She wrote, in a line that had more white around it than the others, that if anyone must wake a sleeping knife, she was glad it was he. Bran did not write. Ravens came, though none bore his hand. One perched on the rim of the tower window and spoke words in a boy's high voice that were not its own. It told John of drought in Dorne, of snow deeper than memory in the gift, of fleets with sails painted green like gardens knotting the stepstones. It told him that there was a room under the red keep where something old had turned over in its long sleep. It told him the world was not obliged to make sense, nor to rhyme, nor to ask permission. It told him that every step he would take next would be both wrong and necessary. Arya wrote from a ship's deck under a striped sky. The hand was the quick slash of a knife showing off. She said she'd heard there was a dragon that made lords spit in their cups. She asked if it was true that he had found the beast in a place where the water could cook fish without fire. She said she'd be angry at him if he made himself a target big enough to be arrowed by idiots. She signed it with an odd little drawing of a face with a smile made of 5 swift strokes. The east stirred. Volantis, which loved nothing so much as its own old dream and its shadow, sent a ship with a black hull and sails the color of burned wine. And on that ship came 3 men who wore the fashion of tigers and had the eyes of men who had never sweated for a meal. They brought an offer that was not an offer, to let Jon present his dragon in the Black Walls and be praised by a city that knew how to praise itself. Lys sent laughter, which is the most dangerous answer of all when it comes from a harbor. Braavos sent a man who wore no sword and spoke like a bell. If a certain piece was to be kept, there would be investments. The Iron Bank never asked for favors. It extended opportunities. To refuse them was to be a fool or a king. Jon did not know which he had the right to be. He flew not to show himself but to learn. He learned the taste of fog that comes off a river at dawn in the Vale and how sheep spook at the sound of a winged shadow. He learned that men's faces do the same as sheep's if those men have spent a lifetime building walls out of fear of anything that moves above them. He learned that grain in the reach is like gold if you fly low enough that the scent of it hits you square, and that old stones in the Stormlands hold lightning in them long after the storm finds some other corner to speak in. He learned that Zaretha's patience was not infinite but was deep, and that the old place in the dragon's mind where the killing slept was not a place he could walk into. He could only stand in the doorway with his hand on the lintel, speak quietly, and see if the sleeping thing chose to turn. Gendry came to Dragonstone in the wake of a squall that scattered gulls like torn paper. The bastard who was no longer a bastard climbed from a skiff with his arms like quarried rock and his eyes squinting in mistrust of the way his life had unrolled into a road men pressed their lips to. The last Baratheon walked into the great hall, and his footfalls had in them the authority of hammers. He bowed, which he did not like to do, and when he straightened his face was open. "I've a castle in need of someone to go on shouting at its walls," he said without preamble. "Every storm that comes thinks it's the first that ever was. I'm to keep the doors from blowing off and the boats from snapping their own ropes. It's a life. I hear you're building one too." "I'm trying not to build what I must tear down," Jon said. Gendry blew out a breath. "You and me both, then." They stood silent a time. Men who made their lives by their arms have quieter silences than others. "I'll not lie. They'll beg you to set your dragon against this lord or that. They'll write songs about the women you don't bed and call you weak. They'll write others about the ones you do and call you worse. I can't tell you not to take what folks want to give. I can tell you the price always comes odd and late." He glanced toward the open arch that let the sea smell into the hall and shook his head once. "He's a big bastard. Makes the skull they keep in the Red Keep look like a dog's toy in my mind." "He's old," Jon said, "and he answers to himself first." "A thing like that always does," Gendry agreed. "Same with men if you let them be men. They drank wine poor enough to be honest and talked of small things until small things seemed to be what life was made of." After Gendry had gone, Jon stood a long time with his hand on the black stone carved into the shape of fire caught in motion. The room breathed. He thought of 100 small decisions, and one very large one that he had not yet come to came for him. Ships with banners he did not recognize came up towards Blackwater Bay without asking leave of the uses of the city. A man with eyes the blue of enamel and hair the color of polished beer called himself a prince of Stepstone blood and demanded coin for passage from every vessel going north or south. He had behind him 10 lean hulls and the kind of men who will turn wolves into dogs if you give them enough salt and time. He had beside him a priest with the pale look of some Eastern faith that eats the sun with its own mouth and calls it fasting. Together they had an appetite that was at once political and religious, which is to say that it wanted a crown and a soul to set upon the crown as if it were a jewel and not a skull. The letters came wrapped in courtesies that were clean as knives. King's Landing sent for aid in all the ways a city sends, with money, with threat, with the soft insinuation that men of honor would never refuse. The small folk sent a very different message in the only language they have ever had. They began to leave. The roads took on a new river of feet. That is how a city pleads. It empties. Jon did not wait to decide. He had always been best when decision and body were one continuous thing that no thinking could outthink. He saddled nothing. He went to the yard where Zareth lay with his head propped like a watchtower and climbed. The dragon lifted him as if he were what had been missing from the day. Davos put a hand to his arm as he passed and said nothing with his mouth. His eyes told a long story about men and seas that ended with hope anyway. They came to the bay from the east, over the fields where some families had stopped with their bundles and simply sat because it was as much leaving as they could do. The city rose like a memory of its own cruelty and its own splendor. The sea was busy moving itself around wood. The 10 lean hulls cut the water cleanly, their oars pulling like the legs of centipedes. The galleys of the city were trapped by a problem older than politics, a wind that would not blow. The bells on the September rang without religion, as if a hand with no belief were shaking them. Jon tasted the old bitterness in the air of that place and let it pass. He did not burn men. He burned water. The first exhale shook the bay into segments of steam. He aimed low, and along the way a scythe lays down grain. The gale that the fire made pushed at the ships like a herdsman with his staff. The men on their decks cried out and made the signs their various gods liked best. He burned slicks across their bows until they slewed and their oarsmen pulled not to press attack but to keep their hulls' noses into the new wind. He made walls of hot air inside which no sail could belly. Behind him, like a second thought, The city's own men found their habits and their courage. They rode. The first clash of hulls sounded like teeth meeting after a long cold. Zareth climbed to avoid the archery that rose below him like impatient bees. Arrows melted in the heat before they came close enough to touch. He did not let the fire quarrel with wood. He let it teach the water to become mist. The attacking ships mistook the words of the lesson, as men will. They turned where the hot air pulled and lost polish like a man loses grace when he begs. The blue-eyed prince cried something in a tongue that had been made for shouting to men on oars and learned suddenly how little years of practice mean when the world decides to change shape under you. The priest tore his garb reflexively in the way that some faiths tear it because they have found no other way to make grief show. Both lived. It had always been John's misfortune that he could not stomach the expediencies other men called hard wisdom. He thought, someone else will kill them for me. He thought it and tasted iron. He rose for a breath and then fell into a long, fast glide across the bay. On his third pass he spoke. He did it without voice. Kaith had taught him a way of placing a thought in the creases of a place. He put out a word into the bay that was not a word and not a command but an old kind of welcome that men knew in their bones. Said only, stop. Said, enough. Said, you are tired. He felt it travel. He felt the oars begin to falter because men remembered suddenly their hands and their hands remembered that they hurt. He felt a skin of quiet lay itself over the bay like oil that was not oil. He felt Zareth's great head lift as if he had heard a comrade speak. The dragon's breath cooled to a shimmer. Afterwards there were petitions written in careful hands and threats written in ugly ones. There were coins moved from one ledger to another and a reckoning of casks and bodies. Men would call it a victory though no street had taken in a river of blood. John went ashore only at night, spoke to the king in a room whose walls were still newly painted and whose windows looked across gardens that had not yet learned their city. Bran's face had gone gaunt with the inwardness that had first saved and then taken him. They did not say very much. They did not have to. John said, do not ask me for war. Bran said, I would not. John said, I will not sit your chair. Bran said nothing because he already knew. They looked at each other across the shape of what they both had become and let it be as simple as acknowledging weather. Sansa arrived in her own time and with her own weather around her. The queen in the north had learned to move like the winter sun, cold and high and saving. She stood in the yard beneath Zareth's resting bulk and did not flinch, which was brave but also practical. She touched her gloved fingers to the dragon's forelimb the way one might greet a doomed treaty. She turned then and kissed John on both cheeks and said his name steadily once, and that was their whole talk until the next day, when they spoke of bread and of roads and of the way a kingdom is a garment one must sew every morning. News from the far west came like a message in a bottle. Arya had found an island that was not on any of the world's maps and was teaching its children to throw knives with both hands because you never knew where your enemies would come from. She had danced with a sailor to a song about dragons old enough that it had forgotten itself and had sung along without understanding a word. She sent a sliver of shell and a line that said simply, don't let them teach you how to be theirs. The years did not become easy. No arrangement does when it must be made with men. But the pattern of disaster altered. A storm that would have made famine in the Vale was drunk by the dragon over the headland and fell lighter inland. A fire that would have devoured 3 villages in the Reach died suddenly when Zareth roared above it and left dew on the thatch. The old fissures under the ground where miners said prayers before their first strike settled at the sound of a voice that was not a voice speaking down long galleries. John did not become a god. He did not become a king. He called himself warden or steward when he had to call himself anything at all. He slept well some nights and others not at all. He loved a little, he lost. Sometimes he woke with the taste of iron in his mouth and could not say whether it was from his own blood or a memory the dragon had lent him. There were wars on the margins, because men who cannot write their names use iron to sign their thoughts on other men's bodies, and there had never been a place so central that its peace could quiet all the edges. John refused many calls and answered others. He refused to take a castle that could be taken. He answered when the sea itself went strange, as if some old thing had lifted its head and shaken itself under the water. He flew out beyond the shoals with Davos strapped behind him, arguing with the wind and laughing into it like a boy, and they saw shapes move that were large enough to make them feel very small. They came back with salt dried into lace on their faces and said nothing to anyone for a day because their mouths were not ready to be men's mouths again. Time made a road behind them that men would call rain, for want of a better word. On that road lay small kindnesses like coins lost and not missed. On that road lay the bones of the men who had followed the blue-eyed prince into a future he could not buy and had been turned away with nothing worse than blistered hands. On that road lay the letter Sansa wrote on a winter night, under a sky that had forgotten color, saying that sometimes she woke and heard a sound like beating wings and did not know if it was the wind or hope. On that road lay Arya's laugh. There came a summer long and kind, and in that summer the smell of crushed thyme rose on the air and bees made a lazy sense of themselves in orchard light. The dragon slept in the shade of a mountain in the times when he was not required, and his sleep was the sleep of a harbor. Children came very quietly to stare up at the ridge of him and went away with their mouths full of cake and a story. Jon grew silver at the temples in a way that did not turn him into a lord and made him look more like a brother to everyone who saw him. He walked with Ghost in the evenings when the heat had left, slow as a man who had learned to be a man and not a symbol. One autumn, when the map had settled for a while into something like an agreement about itself, Jon climbed again to the Hall of Obsidian. He went alone. The steps remembered him. The heat met him like a friend awkward with its own affection. The old seam in the glass floor acknowledged his weight. "Thank you," he said, though he did not know to whom. To the floor for bearing him, perhaps. To the blood for opening the lock. To the woman in the lacquer mask for being a door. He knelt. He looked at his palm, whose scars were quiet and pale, and laid it flat on the glass. The warmth came up into his arm and into his chest and into the oldest room of him where his life had once been kept like a candle. "I'll keep what I can," he said into the silence. "I'll break what I must. I'll make something worth losing." The hall listened the way old places listen. Absolutely without answer. He rose. He went back to the mouth of the world where Zareth waited with his head low and his eyes half closed, the way a creature rests when rest is not sleep but a calculation. Jon climbed one more time the shape that had been waiting for him all his life. They rose into the thin blue where breath is more thought than air, and turned to see the island and the lines of water and the small patchwork of a world that D consented to live because it had been asked by its own old names. Winter would come again. It always did. When it did, it would bring its clear sentences and its honest knives, and the fields would be struck dumb by white and then taught their words again by spring. There would be new princes with old eyes and old women with new tricks. There would be ships with yellow sails and black sails and sails painted with things that had never flown. There would be fights worth fighting and fights only a fool would join. There would be mornings when bread and fish tasted of their own making, and evenings when the fire went low and Ghost put his heavy head on Jon's boot and breathed. High above it all, a dragon beat his wings and wrote a long, dark signature across the weather. And a man whose blood had remembered something the world had almost forgotten kept his hand steady on the hot ridge of that old, living brow. Dawn came rhymed and new, and in it the island breathed like a great animal sleeping on its side. The sea moved with a steadiness that taught the eye patience. It shouldered itself in and shouldered itself out, never in a hurry, entirely convinced of its own continuance. Jon woke sleepless to that quiet and to Ghost's weight against the door, which had not been there when he slept. The dire wolf rose as he did and shook frost from his coat in a tremor that sent little crystals skittering like thrown glass across the floorboards. The air held that taste of iron that came before a change in weather, when men look up from their work without knowing why. Letters waited like small, square burdens. He left them. He went to the yard where the morning pooled before it could spend itself on the island's black stone. Zareth lay with his muzzle on his forelimbs the way a patient beast endures winter, vast and sure, the sunlight slipping along his scales as if it too were learning its path. Jon put a hand to the warm place at the jaw hinge where the thunder gathered when the dragon spoke. He did not speak. The contact was a sentence by itself. They flew when the light had lifted to the color of pale pewter. It was not an errand. He had learned that the errands worth keeping were often the ones the day made for you as you went. They climbed cleanly, the island falling back with the ease of detachment, the world widening until it was less map than breath. The sea took them. Gulls rose half-hearted and let them pass, unconcerned with politics. A pod of porpoises stitched the water below with arcs of wet silver, and Zareth turned his head just so, as if to note the embroidery and approve it. They went west at first, skirting the black ribs of the broken arm, then swung north where the wind offered itself without argument. By noon they were above the shores of the Crownlands where farmers worked hunched and steady in the pale fields, their coats and their lives the same brown. Children ran into the yard with their hands over their eyes as the shadow crossed. One girl of 10 looked up straight, face bare, and flung an apple into the air as if to feed the shadow itself. John saw it flash, saw the idea of it, and remembered a boy in Winterfell who had once loved feats of skill for their own simple sake before the world learned his name. They reached the Blackwater as the tide turned, the river inhaling the sea. Ships went up and ships came down in the ordinary commerce that makes kingdoms not fall. On the city's hill the September's pale dress caught what light there was, and the red keep glowed like a coal under ash. John banked once over the city to teach the roofs that their day was still their own, then set Zareth down outside the walls where old foundations made a broad shoulder of ground. He sent Ghost on ahead. The dire wolf went with the quick, low stride of an animal that is both its own command and another's friend. Bran's hall was not a hall that reminded men to bow. It was a place that reminded them to speak low out of respect for the odd sorts of work that required quiet. The king sat in a chair less high than thoughtful, his hands long and still on the arms, his eyes the color of a clear day seen through birch bark. Ravens talked thin nonsense in the rafters the way men do when they are afraid to be entirely silent. When John came in, Bran's mouth turned in what might have been a smile before it thought better of the word. "The river spoke," Bran said, without preamble, as if he trusted the rest would assemble. It said, "Hurry." The voice wasn't the river's. It was older. The isle has breathed in too long. It will exhale whether we ask it to or not. "The Isle of Faces?" John asked, though what else could the isle be when men spoke without naming? The map of the gods sat in him, etched into the deep by childhood's winter afternoons and a man's unasked for deaths. Bran inclined his head. There was a night last moon when all the weirwoods west of the Trident leaked their color into the river. The water ran pale as milk and then red as love and then clear as if a bird had moved through it and shaken away the dye. Men woke from dreams with sap in their mouths. A woman in Hag's Mire coughed up a seed and put it in dirt, and by morning it was a tree no one there knew how to recognize. The mummers say it makes a good story. The men who cut would have stopped singing. He shifted his gaze like a man turning the page of a book he knew too well. There is a breath trapped inside the isle. If it comes out angry, it will make a season. If it comes out in pain, it will make a war. John felt the day lay its hand upon his shoulder, not heavy, but purposeful. He had come to the city to allow the city its own work. Instead, it had given him something else to carry. "You want me to speak to it," he said softly. Bran's laugh was unkind only to the world. "I want you to listen." Men think talking is always the useful part. He tipped his head, that strange bird-like motion by which he saw things know. Man's eyes could catch. "Take Davos. Take the wolf. Do not take banners. You'll have the city's ships ease off the river," John said, already counting the ways a current can go wrong when men crowd it with their business. "I already have," Bran said, confirming that one of them had learned expedients better than the other. "There's a woman in the Guildhall of River Captains who will call me a fool tonight and pray I keep doing as I've done tomorrow." He looked to the window where the afternoon paled. "Don't tarry. The breath's caught. Let it out kindly if you can." Outside, Davos squinted into the light as if it were less trustworthy than fog. "Can't say I like rivers that make their own minds," he muttered. But he was grinning that grin he wore when the world had put a sensible problem in front of him that required boats or courage. "We'll take the Lysini sloop that thinks it's a Riverland cutter," he added, with a sailor's contempt for ships that lied about their nature. "Shallow draft, clever bones. She'll nose us in where the bigger ladies start to complain. They didn't sail. The river would have put them where it wanted in its own time. They went by air. Davos tied hard into the saddle Davos swore wasn't a saddle. Ghost clamped between Jon's calves for the first jolt into sky, and then loosing himself at once into that uncanny balance he kept on Zareth's spine, as if wolves had been born to run the backs of dragons and had only needed reminding. They followed the river's long thought through meander and cutbank, over oxbow scars and fresh-made scars, until the delta of the Trident's 3 mines opened before them. The isle sat where it had always sat in the eye of that slow debate, clothed in the red-white flesh of the old trees, asleep in the way that listening is a kind of sleep. The water moved around it like hands around a cup that must not be spilled. They settled on the eastern bank where reeds spoke to the air, and the ground was reluctant to be called ground at all. Jon slid down and let the first wet of that mud take him into the ankle, an initiation that made Davos chuckle and spit thinly to one side as if to restore the river its salt. Ghost went forward on splayed paws, light and deft as if the swamp had always been his blood's inheritance. Zareth did not like the smell. He said so with a tilt of head and a sharp, brief snort that misted the air and flattened a stand of reeds. Jon put his hand up again, the way a man greets a horse at the nose, and felt the dragon's large suspicion turn into patience. "Not long," he said aloud, because some comforts are for the speaker more than the spoken to. He walked on. The first of the weirwoods he came to had the look of an old woman's cheek, furrowed and soft, the flesh thin over bone. Its eyes were tired and red and presently aware, not of him, but of the pattern of everything around him. He put his palm to it and did not ask. He offered the warmth in his hand from dragon and man and the little portion of summer that a living body carries within it no matter the season. The bark under his skin felt like honesty. He breathed. In the clearing at the isle's heart, the faces gathered faced inward, as if attending a trial. Their mouths were carved to sorrow, as all such mouths are by men who learned young that to map the world you must first name its pain. In that ring the air had a weight. Davos hung back with the respectful profanity of a sailor at church, hat in both hands though he wore none. Ghost circled the perimeter slow, every third step a pause, attuned to a society of smells Jon could only regard as a liturgy too complicated for him to learn. "I've not come to steal voices," Jon said into the green quiet, disliking the sound of his own speech and making himself go on. "I've come to let out a breath stuck where breath doesn't belong." He felt foolish. He felt correct. He closed his eyes. Kaith's cadence had been of fire, of metals taken to heat until their minds changed shape. This rhythm was slower. He found it in his bones where ice keeps bells quiet. He put his palms to the ground and let the isle feel the old burn in him, the one nobody had put there, that simply was. The first answer was pain. It rose spared, a child's cry inside a jar. It hurt. He did not pull back. He had learned once in another long winter that hospitality often looks like not flinching when someone shows you they're wound. He breathed through the ache and gave the ache his breath. The second answer was anger. It came tight, unspent, a pressure that made his teeth ache. He did not speak to it. He let it speak. Said, "You cut us." It said, "You made us sing in one voice, and in doing so you forgot we were a choir." It said, "We kept your dead." It said, "We remembered when you could not afford to." He knelt and took the words as a man takes the scolding he deserves, not proudly, not abasing himself, but with the small, bright heat of shame inside a larger light. He let Zareth through him then, the way Kaith had taught him to open a door without forcing passage. He did not pour fire, he poured warmth. He let the isle smell mountains and the old long breathing of the earth where men had never set a ladder to a branch. He let it taste steel made honest by work. He let it feel the steady shoulder of a beast who had known servitude and refused it, who had known mastery and refused that too, keeping only the companionship of purpose. The heat went out of him like a tide laying itself down. The ring of faces watched without blinking. When he had nothing left, the faces leaned, almost imperceptibly, as if they had made some decision among themselves without needing to speak it. The exhale came. It was not a wind. It was the end of holding one's breath too long. It went out through the trunks and through the soil and through the delicate web of root and rock and water that men never see unless they have drowned and lived to tell it. It went out acro, assessed the trident and into the fields and up the old river stairways into the mountains where very little grows. It went down to the mouths of fishes and into the slow minds of turtles that had sat on the river bottom longer than most prayers last. It went up again into the throats of birds who, finding their songs changed slightly, sang them anyway. Davos fell backward onto his arse in the mud and laughed the bright, frightened laugh of a man unexpectedly spared a beating. 7 bloody hells, he said like a blessing. Ghost shook himself end to end and sneezed 3 times, offended by the complicity of smells that had been set in motion. Jon bowed his head not to the trees but to the discipline it had cost them to keep their anger that long. They camped on the east bank where a ground that passed for ground made its case beneath a patch of dry brush. Jon slept an hour as if he had been poured into the sleep, then woke to the sound of little feet and bigger caution. 2 children watched from the reeds, bare-legged, their hair cut short by water and their eyes a river's color. Behind them, far enough that the river could swallow him if he needed swallowing, stood a man with a spear whose point had been sharpened by boredom into luster. The girl moved first. She came to within a yard of Ghost, who watched her with the vast tolerance of a predator certain of himself, and knelt to put her hand to the direwolf's flank. Her face, when she looked up at Jon, held both respect and appraisal. "The trees stopped crying," she said, "the way children report weather to kings. They asked me not to let them hold their breath that long again," Jon said. She nodded as if that were the kind of instruction adults always brought back from adult places. "You'll have fish," she added, and when he smiled at that small mercy as if it were larger than a king's gratitude, she went away laughing. Bran's ravens found them before noon the next day with 3 messages carried in one set of wings, which is always how trouble flies. The first said the stepstones had swallowed a fleet and spat out its bones, and the men with the yellow sails were counting those bones coin by coin. The second said a golden priest of Volantis with a mouth like a knife edge had preached a sermon in the Black Wall about a black-winged omen that would cure tyrants by becoming one. The crowd had been large and had not known whose tyrants were meant. The third was a scrap of parchment with a blot of seawater that had dried in a shape like a knife. A sign Arya had taught him meant she was near and meant to be nearer. They met at dusk on the roof of an inn that had been a stable once, and still smelled faintly of hay under the onion soup and beer. Arya came long-legged out of the dark like a thought, thinner than he remembered and more herself than anyone else could ever be. She looked at Zareth once, not with awe but with an interest that had an edge to it, as if considering where the softest parts must be and hating herself for the thought. Then she smiled, which banished all of that the way light banishes a shadow's claim to be a thing itself. "I hear you talk to wood and water now," she said, bumping his shoulder with hers because hugging was something she did rarely and for children or ghosts. "Wood and water have better manners than men," he said, and the words filled his chest with a pain so sudden he knew it for happiness. They sat and ate soup from a single bowl, trading the spoon without thinking, watching the river take its own small night. "You know there's a price with faces," she said later, when Ghost had settled with his nose on his paws, and the inn's owner had stopped coming up the stairs to make sure his roof was not a trap for somebody else's story. "There's a name of a price the house likes to pretend it knows and it doesn't. They pretend it's coin. It never was. It's always story. Steal a face, you steal a story. The world will want it back. It comes for you in the dark and in daylight and in dreams, and sometimes it comes in nothing at all, just the quiet. You listening?" "I am," he said. "Why now?" "Because it's coming," she said cheerfully. "A man with no name wants your name because it fits his knife. Maybe he thinks there's a door behind your skull he can open with it and get a dragon to come out. Maybe he only wants to be famous in a place where nobody's famous because nobody is anybody. Doesn't matter. He's good. I'm better. I don't like the house's gods. I like ours. Thought I'd tell you not to drink anything somebody else pours for you for a bit." She patted his hand like a grandmother and turned her face to the river's dark, ears working like a hound's in sleep. The assassin came 3 nights later in the place any fool could have predicted, Dragonstone, where the stone's breath muddles a man's sense of when the day starts and ends, where men guard gates because guarding gates feels useful and forget roofs because roofs feel like weather. He was thin and capable and dressed like nobody worth remembering. He moved like water in a tight bottle, contained and relentless. Jon saw him at the last possible instant, not with his eyes but with that trained noticing the north gives its men. A silence where there ought to have been a sound. A pause where gravity should have hastened. He went left. The blade took his coat instead of his ribs. Ghost's shoulder hit the man in the thigh with the sound of two stones meeting. Arya was behind the man and then inside his reach and then away again in 3 breaths, smiling almost kindly as she fetched the knife she had put in his wrist back out so he would at least bleed a little more slowly. "Tell whoever sent you the dragon has teeth in the dark," she said, and knocked him cold with the ease of an older sister cuffing a boy for stealing pears. They kept him alive until morning and then turned him loose on a southbound road with a purse and a story to tell, which was a MO. Elaborate cruelty than a simple death. Some men deserve death. Others deserve to live long enough to question their gods. Volantis next, because old cities and their priests are like tinder near a hearth. They either catch or they smolder until something else does. They went oversea with Davos grumbling that a man should never put his faith in wind you cannot see, even when it lifts your ribs and makes your blood happier than wine. The city rose out of its own shadow, black and hot and scented with 1,000 acts of living stacked close together. The black walls kept their breath in and let the smell out. Zareth disliked the place at once. He hung on the air above it like a thunderhead that had not chosen its bolt. The red priests brought out their fires in bowls of brass like arguments placed upon a table. The tiger's men wore their stripes as if their mothers had licked them on. The priest who had spoken of omens came to the fore with his palms out to show he carried nothing, which in such men is always exactly when they carry most. He had the well-fed voice of a man who believes being heard is a sacrament. "This," he cried to the crowd, pointing his fine, ringed finger up into the blaze of wing and bone, "is the darkness a man will put on like a cloak if you let him call it dawn. He will stand between sun and steeple and call the shadow holy. He will drink your fear like milk. He will." Jon had been taught once that there are 2 ways to meet lies: with greater lies, or with something quieter. He chose the latter because it was the only tool he trusted in his own hand. He brought Zareth down slow and heavy into the plaza where the heat made the stone sweat. He climbed down. There was no sound like a crowd's breath held between violence and a story. He walked until he was between the priest and the people and then turned his back to the priest and looked at the people the way a man looks at a shore. "I've come to ask a favor," he said, not raising his voice, and waited for the sound of it to teach itself where to go. "Not a coin, a kind of listening. Your city is old enough to know the difference between a man and a thing a man rides. I want you to keep that difference, even if men like the sound of it better the other way. If ever I speak to your walls, I will be speaking to old stones and to the bones beneath them. I won't be speaking to your children. If ever I speak to your river, it will be to teach it the word enough in a flood and never in a drought. The dragon is not a decree. He is a question the world asked long before I was born." He spread his hands empty. "If a man tells you a story in which you are small and he is large, ask who taught him the trick of measuring." Silence settled like ash. Then, in it, the scratch of a child's sandal. A boy with soot on his nose stepped forward, the color of his skin like polished chestnut, and put his hand to Zareth's forelimb without asking anyone for permission. The dragon turned his great head and breathed out a long, low sound like a bell, feeling the finger on it and choosing not to ring. The boy began to laugh in astonishment, the way children laud their own courage once it has survived contact with reality. The crowd let go a breath they had not admitted they were holding. Men who had been prepared to hate found themselves having to economize their hatred. It is a tiring business. The priest's mouth worked. The words had left him or the market had taken them away. He made a sign in the air to suggest an argument he could not furnish, then dropped his hands with the grace a man learns when he has been defeated by something other than force. "This city will make up its own mind," he said, his voice almost gentle, which was its most dangerous register. "See that you let it." They left with their heads attached. which qualifies as success in any old city that has convinced itself it's an idea with walls. Davos slept on the deck by choice, letting the river of air laugh in his hair. Dreams do nicer work with a sailor out under God's big bowl. Arya vanished and reappeared and vanished again around the edges of the world like a thought you almost have and then lose when someone speaks to you. Ghost hunted flying fish and failed nobly, content to gnash at spray and the odd, audacious gull. On Dragonstone, Kaith waited in the place a door makes for a person who is not a person. "You have put a hand on the scale," she said without greeting, as if they had paused their last conversation and not lived 3 seasons between. "Do not cry out when the weights roll like coins." "I'm not asking to evade the price," Jon said, more tired than he knew. "I'm asking to understand it before it comes so I can take it from the hands of the wrong men." "Then hear a small thing," she said, and he heard the smallness like a bell whose toll goes on a little after the clapper stills. "The beast you woke is old. He is not an end. He is a bridge. Behind your shoulder stand feet. Not one set, many. The air smells of shell and fire and something like lime. The mountain on which you live holds more than one thought in its hot mind. When the day comes you will hate that I told you and be grateful that I did." Her mask tilted. "Do not teach them to be you," she added almost kindly. "Teach them to be what they are without burning themselves to know it. Breaking is easy. Tempering is slow." He did not sleep that night. He walked instead the black corridors that had once held echoes of dead kings, and now held the softer noises of living men and women who had stopped pretending this was not a home and that they were not, to some small degree, a people. He came at last to the old storehouse where Stone had learned, once, to be egg. He had not gone down there since the day he had bled into the hall and woken an age. The air struck his face with that specific breath. Warm, mineral, a whisper of brimstone like a secret repeated by a friend who wants you to like it. The torches burned steady as old habits. He saw them before he knew that he had seen them because something in him sat up before his eyes did. Around the central pillar where men once hung harness and chain lay 5 shapes the color of old bone that had never seen sky. They were not so large that hope would become foolishness, nor so small that hope would become greed. They were eggs in the way mountains are mountains. Not yet themselves and entirely themselves. He stopped and did not move for a long time, as if motion would teach time to spend itself faster. Zareth came without being called, the sound of his weight on stone like an argument between oaths. He put his great head low and breathed not heat but the ghost of heat, the way a man warms his hands before trying a delicate task. The old inner lid slid across one eye and back. He made a sound so low Jon felt it in his own stomach more than heard it. A note of naming, of assent, of warning to no one in particular. Jon knelt. He did not touch. He held his hands out as if to a hearth. He remembered Kaith's small bell. He counted with his heart. 5. He bled a little then into the space between eggs and stone. Not on them, not claiming, merely offering what had once opened a door no one else could open because the lock had been made for him and for blood like his. The drops fell and were taken into the breath of the room with a small, satisfied sound. He spoke nothing. This would be a long, slow work in which the man is less agent than witness, less father than steward. He rose in the dark before dawn and went to the yard to greet the sky's clearing throat. Ghost pressed against his leg. Davos stumped out to stand with him, rubbing his face grotesquely with both hands as if to put himself back into it for the day ahead. They watched the light make a case for itself along the sea. "When you find something living that ought to be dead," Davos said, as if speaking to the day, "the world will try to spend it too fast." He glanced sidelong. "Best to ration miracles." "I don't mean to show them," Jon said. "Not for a long while. They'll learn in heat and hush. If they're to fly, may it be because the sky invites them, not because I drag them to it." "That's priest talk from a man with no altar," Davos said fondly. "Good." The stepstones sent trouble and, less predictably, opportunity. The blue-eyed prince, robbed of his moment and his myth, had reinvented himself as a man selling passage from rock to rock with a new coin minted from old grudges. He had clever hirelings, and his priest had found a gospel of profit coiled inside the gospel of flame. They levied a tithe on fear. The narrow sea does not forgive that kind of innovation. It copies it. Soon every bay with 2 water-worn caves and a gull rookery thought itself a principality. John would not burn men to make a point. He would not burn ships to chastise the water. He made a different decision, which is always how men find themselves alone. He went to Bravos without sending word, without suitors, without the clothing that would allow an audience to tell itself it knew him before he had spoken. He went as a man and found the Iron Bank. They met him in a room meant to be impressive in a way that weary men respect. Quiet, high, cool, the sound taken out of corners so that thoughts could conduct their own business without echo. A woman in a dress the color of late olives took him through the exchange of names the Bravosi call courtesy and other men call uncertainty with pearls. When they sat, she sat not opposite him but at a soft angle, as if to accept that men speak better to the sea when they can look a little past it. Your city gains nothing when the sea becomes a ledger too many men write upon, John said without delay. Your ledger gains less. The stepstones have made a toll of luck. Luck will find a different road. Meanwhile, the men who happily pay to move grain will happily pay to move soldiers. The wind smells of iron, not coin, iron. The woman rested her folded hands on the table and considered his face as if she were measuring a jewel whose flaws would become its value. We do not go to war, she said, with that apostolic calm the bank cultivated as if it had a saint of its own. We go to interest. We invest in the possibility that men prefer eating to killing. She tipped her head the smallest fraction. We have begun buying rights in harbors that do not yet exist. Then sell one, John said, and watched the quick silver flicker in her eyes. Amusement, and then the brightness that comes to a mind when given an honest problem that is also a pleasure. Sell me one down current of the worst of it. I will keep it from bleeding. I will pay it with quiet. Your investment gets a wall without soldiers and a mooring without a tax. We teach a different habit to the sea. We teach it to pass. You are a poor king, she said mildly, not as insult but as observation. I am no king, he said. That is what I meant, she returned, her mouth almost soft with the compliment she had not meant to pay. Very well. We will own a harbor together that insists on being a road. You will pay us in the thing that keeps coins in purses. Predictability. Do not fail. We dislike litigation with the weather. He walked out into Bravo's wet, stubborn light and felt the day settle on him again, as if the world were putting one of its hands on his back and one on his chest to align him with its own spine. He laughed quietly, because sometimes a man laughs when he has put a stone in a river and the river decides to go around it and become prettier. That night, he wrote to Sansa with the calm detail of an accountant, explaining a harbor that would be a road that would be a habit, and a habit that would make many small wars too expensive to excel at. Winter came as it always does, without asking and without apology, but it came with a civility it had lacked in his Yout. The storms were honest and the snows brief and the cold deep but not petty. The north held because it had been built to hold. The riverlands learned again the grammar of flood and field. The dragon slept often to save his great heat, and in his sleep rumbled a music that settled men's hearts without their consent. The eggs warmed by the mountain and by a man's steady presence did not crack. That was grace. They also did not cool. That was work. In the spring, which the day laid delicately over the sea like a shawl a girl might wear a little too early because she wanted to dance. He took Zareth north along the coast and then inland to a lake that had frozen longer than any man alive remembered. He circled once and then again, and the third time the dragon spoke into the ice. It did not split. Beside, it gave water back to the world like a mother forgiving a child she had scolded too harshly. Fishermen on the shore fell to their knees and then to laughter, and one old woman threw her kerchief and danced with her hair on her shoulders like a girl. He landed at Maidenpool a week later to find the yard full of boys trying to teach one another to stand very straight, and a girl with a stick correcting them by hitting their shins with practiced blows that had learned mercy. Brienne of Tarth stood like a tower and smiled a great smile that made her seem, for an instant, small. She took John's arm and drew him into the shade and told him in her quiet, complete way that the world was better when men stood as if their bodies were promises kept. He listened, grateful for the blunt gospel of a life spent dutifully until duty had become joy. He left with a bruise on his forearm from a friendly cuff and the sense that not all courage needs dragons to make it sing. New letters found him wherever the wind permitted. Gendry wrote to say a child had been born on a night of lightning, and he had never known a feeling both larger and more frightening than the one that ran his ribs like fire when the infant cried. He asked as if joking whether dragons liked the smell of babies. Arya pinned a note to a messenger's vest with a fishhook, and it said only, "I broke a man's gospel with a grin. He deserved it." Bran's raven came with a feather braided into the band around its leg. The feather was the pale gray of winter morning and meant something only to those who saw trees in their sleep. Jon kept it in his coat like a small oath. Summer again, then hot and plummy and indulgent. And in it an ending he had not rehearsed because rehearsals of endings spoil their power. Zareth lifted his head one noon and looked to the mountain without sound. Jon had learned what that look meant the way men learn the faces of women who have shared their bread. Intimacy without speech. He went with him down the long steps. The air grew warmer, and then it grew thoughtful, as if deciding between being warmth and being heat. In the hall of obsidian where the first great breath had changed his life, he knelt and bled into a bowl whose glass held the idea of sky. The blood went down and was gone, and the air changed without moving. One egg had darkened in its veins. It was not cracking. It was thinking about it. Kaith stepped out of the corner where a door has the right to be if a door needs to be. "The world will want this to be a trumpet," she said, and the sound of her voice did the opposite of fill the room. It made space. "Do not let it. Let it be a heartbeat. The first is for war. The second is for life." He did as he had done before, only slower. Gave warmth, gave patience, gave the simple attendance of a man unashamed to be a midwife. Hours slipped quiet as silt. Zareth made the low, lowing sound again. "That is a world in a word. I remember. I accept. I guard." The egg did not so much crack as soften and then let itself be not egg. The creature that came into air had the look that all newborn things have. Anger at the suddenness of its need to breathe, and indignation that the world had not warned it. Jon laughed soundlessly and found that tears were moving down his face without his consent. He made a little cup of his hands under the small skull without touching and just let the first breath be what it was. The second was easier. The third was a song. He did not name it. Names are banners as well as blessings. He kept silence and let the dragonling decide what to keep of the world's noises. It sneezed, which was a scandal, and shook the wet from its small, perfect spurs. It had wings like a rumor and eyes like embers roused by a bellows. It looked at him a full minute, and then it looked a long time at the great head of the one whose shadow had made its heat, and the inner lid moved across its new eye and back. Jon felt something in him unclench that had been tightening since the day he first gave his blood to the hall. Relief tempered by duty, joy tempered by the knowledge that joy must be husbanded like seed corn. He slept in the chair outside the door like a father of no right pretending to be a father of every right. Davos found him at dawn and put a blanket he'd sworn never to own over his shoulders and said nothing, then said everything with a single ridiculous sniff. Ghost snored with soft, interrogative whuffs at strange smells no wolf ever had business knowing. Kaith was gone, as doors are when the people who keep them have done what they came to do. In his sleep Jon dreamed only of plain bread and clear water and a long road that did not frighten him. By noon the island knew without being told, as islands do. Children practiced being quiet and failed nobly. Women carried bowls of broth as if the air were jostling. Men did the one piece of work that made them feel they were part of a miracle. They swept. Zareth lay like a continent and allowed himself, for the first time in Jon's memory, to look old in a way that was not weakness but satisfaction. When the dragonling cried, he lifted his head slowly and swirred low and long. Every small thing on the island paused a heartbeat, then resumed itself with a set to the shoulders you see on men who have heard good news and decided to keep working. Jon walked at evening along the ridge where wind goes to remember. He carried, as he would carry every day that followed, the measured weight of a trust the world had placed in him without his consent and with his full agreement. He listened. The island told him small weather. The sea told him a ship had been foolish beyond its means and learned from it and did not drown. The sky told him nothing but itself, which was mercy. He thought of Sansa's ink-stiff fingers and Arya's knife-quick grin and Bran's eyes full of bark and winter light, of Gendry's laugh, of Brienne's upright patience, of Davos' vulgar kindness, of a boy in Volantis who had touched a dragon with his hand and found his day altered without becoming a sermon, of a woman in Bravos who had sold him a road disguised as a harbor, of the faces on the Isle of Faces breathing out and in together like a choir if a choir knew how to work, of a man in a mask, who would look at him in a mirror somewhere and learn nothing from the look and be troubled by that. The dragonling slept, the great dragon watched, the mountain thought its warm thoughts, the island kept breathing. The men and women kept sweeping the same corners every afternoon because that is how a life admits itself a life. And Jon stood between weather and weather with his hand on a stone older than tyrants and the careful, plain happiness of a man allowed to be exactly what his blood and his refusal had made him.